What's good, people? How we feeling? Right, so hello, Scott. Welcome to the What Does Your Mum Think podcast. Thank you so much for doing this with us today.
Great to be here, and thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for doing it. How's your morning?
Well, it just started. It's actually quite beautiful today in Portland. We've had a lot of rain, but right now it's a little sunny outside for the new time zone, so everything's good.
Yeah, nice. I need to get out there, So when we kick things off, we always take it back to the beginning to see how things started and see where things started. So, what was Scott like as a kid? What first sparked that creative fire?
Great question. It's funny when you pose the sort of chapters you'd be talking about. I hadn't really thought about myself as a kid in a long time. And one of the things that really defined me as a kid was that I actually had amblyoptic dyslexia. And so as a kid in elementary school, I couldn't read very well. And that type of dyslexia is where you really don't see the whole word. Your brain doesn't process the whole word. It only kind of sees letters. And so for me, it was very difficult to read. But I came from a super educated family. My father was a university dean at Bowling Green State University in Ohio. So we had, very well, vocabulary and very educated people around me all the time. But when I was in school, I just wasn't reading at the level that I was in. And so for my entire childhood, up to like about fifth grade, reading was one of the most terrifying things you could ask me to do. And I came from an era where they used to have each kid read a paragraph as you went around the school class. And I can still remember it. It kind of brought back memories of me just in this cold sweat because I could not read. And I would just stutter and try to formulate the words. And nobody could figure out what was happening because my vocabulary was a couple grades beyond what grade I was in. But my reading level was a couple grades below. So I was always in the lowest. You used to have reading levels when you were in third grade and fourth grade. I was always in the lowest reading level. That really sort of affected me. One, because my parents didn't understand what was going on. And two, it was just a lot of social stigma happening around, my intelligence. And my intelligence was fine. It just, I could not read. And it wasn't until about the fourth grade where a optometrist or obstetrician actually discovered, I think your son has a form of dyslexia. And from that point on, it was kind of course corrected. And it just kind of unlocked sort of a thirst for knowledge in me. And even though I was in the Midwest, I was exposed to museums and things like that. And so as I got older and was in high school, really, and again, we're talking in the mid 80s. So this is a long time ago. This is before the internet, before design was accessible as it is today. And so at that point, my big sort of unlock was, I want to be an architect because architecture is sort of the best blend between creativity and sort of like what I thought was like a real job. And so the other thing though, is before you can become a freshman in architecture, you actually have to have the most advanced mathematics through high school. So I had to take a summer course in a calculus. I don't know if any of you have had calculus before in your schooling.
I've not. Michael, have you?
No, I don't think so. I haven't. No.
I mean, it makes algebra look like, child's play. And again, I managed to squeak my way through, and I was there were three schools that I really wanted to go to, but University of Cincinnati was the kind of one. It was in Ohio. It was actually one of the best design schools in the nation. Michael Graves, a very famous architect, had actually gone to University of Cincinnati, and they had a design school there called Design, Architecture, Art, and Planning. So it was really my first exposure when I left my hometown to all of the design disciplines: graphic design, industrial design, architectural design, fashion design. And it was overwhelming. I mean, I had never been exposed to so many talented, creative individuals before. And these, didn't even know what industrial design was until I got to university and, realized that these objects and these shapes and all of this is this wonderful world of people thinking about how we're going to use it, how we're going to interact with it. And so I studied architecture for 2 years, and loved it. I will be very honest. The mathematical part was my biggest struggle. I had to have calculus before going into architecture. I describe architectural structural engineering as calculus on steroids. And it's these, massive problems that take a whole page. Then you plug in that answer, and then you figure out if you did it right. And if you didn't do it right, you'd have to go through all that again. And, some people have that aptitude. They just are like, I'm sure you were in school with people who just had a mathematical aptitude and their mind just thinks differently. Mine did not think that way. And it would take me the entire time. And I might have eked out a D+ if I was really lucky. But on the creative side, the studios where I was creating and imagining, I was an A student. And that's the part that I loved. Architecture is a very sort of highbrow discipline. There's a lot of language and a lot of, architects have a lot of this sort of, this reasoning of why they do things. And it really sort of spoke to me until I made a trip to New York. And this was back in the 80s again. And New York is much different than what you were living right now. I mean, it was, I kind of looked up.
How old would you have been then?
I would have been just 19.
Nice. So
super young. Still super young. I mean, so coming from the Midwest, and now I'm, going to New York for the weekends. And in the 80s, New York was this sort of contradictory era of, it was dangerous. There's a lot of areas where you didn't want to be late at night, which I was. There was this sort of vibrant, art scene and creativity and punk and dance and the club scene. And it's really where you sought out creativity. There was no iPhone. There was no, Details magazine came once a month. And that was kind of what you looked to. Interview magazine came once a month. And so the pace of knowledge was much more of an ebb and flow. But the right now was only if you were at the right place at the right time with the right people. So it was all of this sort of, looking for your tribes in this metropolis that was crazy and the Lower East Village. And you had artists like Keith Haring and designers like Calvin Klein and Diane van Furstenberg, and all of these people were just sort of going to these clubs and to these restaurants, and it was quite amazing. And looking back at it, it feels very thoughtful and planned. But at the moment, it was very chaotic. I wasn't in control of any of it. It was just like all of these things flying towards me. And I might try to grab part of it. And one of the most sort of happenstance thing that happened was there was a lawyer in Cincinnati who happened to be very good friends with Andy Warhol. And I had a really great friend in school. I'm gay, he was straight, so it was kind of an odd match already, but he loved dance music of gay bars. And so he would go to New York with me. And one trip to New York, this lawyer said, you know what, why don't you, and this was before iPhone, so we actually had a call via a hotel phone, which was then a three-way call, which was like big technology back then.
Nice.
And Warhol's right-hand man was a guy named Rupert Smith. And he goes, all right, send those boys over. We'll meet them. So we went to the factory and we met Rupert Smith and we met Warhol. Wow. And they kind of, I think we were like sort of like a cat toy for them. They're like, oh, these Midwest boys look fun. We'll sort of take them out and see what happens. And so for about a year and a half, every time that we went to New York, I would call Rupert and they would put us on any list that we wanted to. And we would walk right in, and it just gave me this sort of, entry into a group of people by total accident. I was just I was a dumb, streetwise dumb kid from Midwest that suddenly had all of these international influences coming my way. And the story that this reminded me of was, it's kind of, there was an emotional event where my father had a heart attack. He survived it. But that was my impetus to say, you know what, I'm really unhappy in architecture. I want to switch to fashion design. And so I was in New York. I was at a famous restaurant called Odeon Cafe, might still be around. And Warhol was there, Rupert Smith was there, and I like made this big announcement to the table, like, I'm going into fashion design. And Warhol didn't actually say much. He always allowed sort of everyone around him to kind of be the language. He would sort of work sort of odd little sentences here and there. He had a very monotone voice. And his first reaction was, oh, that's such a mistake. I'm like, what? And that's the last he said, and he just said, oh, and I think the gist of it for him was that he thought architecture was such a sort of, highbrow sort of endeavor, and that fashion. And he was also around a lot of fashion people. So I think he was just sort of poking the bear when he said that. But even though he said that, I got into fashion at that point and actually never looked back. And at that point, there was a fashion school at University of Cincinnati, but the best schools were Parsons in New York and Otis Parsons on the West Coast. Mm-hmm. And so I applied to both of them. And I was, at that time, I was doing an internship in Los Angeles. So that kind of brought me to the West Coast. And then I dropped out of University of Cincinnati and attended Otis Parsons in New York. Otis Parsons in Los Angeles as a fashion major, or as a liberal arts major with a degree in fashion design. I started as a sophomore because the foundation year was really sort of theory and art history and that. And I told them, you know what? I've been in architecture school for 3 years. I got that foundation stuff down. So I started as a sophomore and loved it. I had in fact, one of the students there is still one of my best friends. So I really, made some amazing sort of friendships at that school. It gave me the structural tools that I needed to go out in the industry, but it certainly didn't give me everything that I learned once I was in the industry.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fucking hell. Wow, Jesus Christ. Lots to unpack. Michael, please.
I'm a little bit speechless, to be honest, Scott, because, when you're in the space of art and design, like you know so much about those parties that happen in New York. There's like Jean-Michel Basquiat, there's Annie Leibovitz, and obviously the man himself, Andy Warhol. And so, I don't even know where to start, Scott. That's absolutely insane. One thing that I'm really interested in is, you spoke a lot about, reading, struggling with reading, and then going into thinking about architecture and mathematics, which is very academic. At what point did you know that you was a creative person? And was it that led you into these rooms? Because it sounds like your journey is like a bit of a like all over the place.
Mm. Yeah, that sums it up greatly. I think my journey to architecture was what I knew at the time that could be, actually, I mean, everybody in my family was educated. My father had 2 doctorates. He was just like, so the idea of not going to school was just never an option. So I knew I was going to be college educated. And so architecture seemed to be that path that was a blend between my artistic desire and kind of what I thought were the sort of jobs where you could channel that artistic desire. And it was the exposure once I was at school as a freshman where, there's architecture, but there's all these other avenues of creativity. There's this industrial design. I didn't even know an industrial design. Like, we see the work of industrial designers all the time. Cars, vacuums, appliances, whatever. You just didn't think as a 17-year-old kid, well, who's actually thinking about that? And, that's really actually a job. And the colors, that's actually somebody forecasting what we're going to want is color. And so the exposure so architecture was great for me because it led me to University of Cincinnati, which led me to all of these other creative types there, including a fashion school, which led me to the connections that led me to New York. And I was like a sponge. I was just, I was sucking it all up. In hindsight, it feels much more purposeful. But as it was happening, it was much more helter-skelter. I wasn't planning any of those things. They were these life moments that myself was intersecting with, and I was grabbing a hold of, and I had no fear either. I would leave a club on the Lower East Side at 3 a.m. With addicts on the floor and pickpockets across the street. And, I didn't, at that age, you have no fear. thank God nothing ever happened to me. But that was actually that coarseness, that roughness, that rawness is actually something, as I was thinking about, this era of my life, I kind of missed, because today everything is so polished and so, filtered and crafted and air touched and smudged and you're talking about the takes and the outtakes or what have you. Like, gosh, that rawness is what we need more of. And I sent you that link of all the posters of the clubs back then. And there's such a rawness to the graphic design because the tools weren't what we have today. But there's such a sort of an emotional attachment that I have now when I look at that stuff. You had party flyers. That was the way that people communicated where things were happening, because there was no group chat, there was no, room. And so I think that, but that's all we knew. And so, looking back, I can kind of place all of these sort of moments of history, of art, of design, what's happening in New York, the sort of, the sort of club scene and, that. But at the moment when I was involved in it, it all felt very big and very, unattainable. Like I didn't quite understand everything that was going on, but I was also very focused on not getting sucked into that, because I was always returning to school, to study, to work, to graduate, to excel in what I loved, which was fashion design.
So you graduated in fashion design then. Once graduated, what was the next steps from there?
Yeah, so I was in Los Angeles, and the next steps was I was hired as the lead designer for a company called Protest. And it was a young men's company. It was Indian owned, and it was when grunge was huge. And so I was able to nail grunge really quickly. What was also great about that job is that I would go about 4 or 5 times a year to India and Hong Kong to create the lines. And so suddenly here I am, 20-something, traveling to Hong Kong, Frankfurt, whatever. We would do, and this was something that was so fantastic, which I loved, is we would do these sort of inspiration trips. And so we would hit off, cities like Rome, Paris, London, Barcelona, to sort of be inspired. And then we would go to Delhi to sample the line, create print strategies in Hong Kong. And then I was noticed pretty quickly and was offered to create my own line, funded by a huge knit mill in Los Angeles called Crown Fleece Spondale Mills. And so I created 3 labels called Crash Poets, which was sort of our hip specialty stores. We had covers and details and what have you. And then we had a line called Rematch, which was kind of the department stores like JCPenney's and Kohl's. And we had a line called Rematch, which was for the sort of mass people like Walmart and stuff like that. So I was designing these 3 segments of lines, and it just took off. It went from like 0 to 50 million in about 2 years, which is a pretty phenomenal growth.
Wow.
We would do Magic, which is the men's apparel guild show in Las Vegas. It happens twice a year. So I was designing the booth, I was designing the PR, I was designing the advertisement, I was bringing in models, I was designing the line, I was doing all of that. And it was fantastic, but it was limited. And at that point, a friend of mine who had been working at Nike said, you know what, you should check out Nike. So I'm like, I don't know, Portland, and I love Los Angeles, and I don't know. And so there was a recruiter who said, well, no, they're going to fly you up and, have an open mind, see what they have to offer. And so at that point, there was a person who was a VP at Nike who sat in Orange County. So I went and spoke to him. Then they flew me up, and I spoke to the entire apparel team, the VPs at the time. They offered me a job, and I still was unsure. So they'll go, well, you know what, let's do this. Let's have you try us out, and we'll try you out. And so I flew up to Nike for 4 months solid every week. And it felt very rock starish for the first 3 weeks. And then after the 4th week, it got really tiresome because, I'd come back home and do my laundry and what have you. But then I was on a flight again back to Portland.
Yeah, they're big flights as well. How long's the flight from LA to Portland? Oh, well, from the West Coast to Portland.
It's not that bad a flight. It's 2.5 hours.
I've done it, like getting through security and all that malarkey. It's a lot.
Well, it's not only that. Then you're living at a hotel, which sounds really glamorous. Yeah. But you don't have any food. It's it's all takeout and what have you. But it was all good because it realized that this is really a great opportunity and a great job. So they hired me. So at that point, Nike has gone through a lot of organizational changes. And at that point, Nike was aligned where it was by geography. So they had the US geography, they had Asia geography, and they had Asia Pacific. They had Asia Pacific and had Europe. And in each of those areas sat design teams that actually created product kind of for their region. And the business was split up with athletic specialty stores, so things like Foot Locker and everything like that, and department stores. The zone that they hired me for was the biggest part of the business. So there was a lot of eyes on what I did. And when I first started, and this no longer is the organization because it was not workable long term, but my style count when I first came in there was 140 styles per season, which is a lot for one person.
Explain that. Dive deeper into that. Explain what that means exactly.
So that means there were about 12 different collections that I was in charge of. So there'd be things like cut and sew t-shirts. There'd be 1 or 2 fleece collections. There would be the big tracky warm-up was a big sort of commodity that was what was used. There would be board shorts. There would be athletic shorts. So there was all of these classifications. Outerwear. So I was designing everything from complex outerwear to board shorts for a spring-summer season, which was about 140 styles. So that's 140 styles that are picked. That's about 300 styles, 400 styles that you're designing to get to those styles that are picked.
That's wild. And what position are you there at that stage? What's your title?
So at that point, I'm a senior designer.
So you got hired. So you got hired at Nike for your first role after your first position at the other place as a senior designer. How does it work there at Nike in regards to the levels?
So there's a design 1, design 2, senior. At the time, there was really, and it went from a senior to a VP. They didn't really have that much of a structure. I was part of building a structure within design. So it went from senior designer, design director, creative director, VP.
Okay.
So after about a year and a half of this sort of classification, which was great. I mean, I did well. They actually started to use what I designed in Europe as well as in the department stores, but they would color it differently. And this was a time where if you went to like a Nike store in the US, you would see a footwear assortment. But if I went to a Nike store in Amsterdam, totally different. Different colors, different whatever, which was kind of cool because we would all travel to like Tokyo and Amsterdam and pick up these colorways that could be found nowhere. But the organization started to shift to more of a centrally located world headquarters at Beaverton. So, the philosophy went, we actually have more in common than we have not in common. So let's really stand up that. And that's when they hired me to be the design director globally for men's. And so that's kind of really where my Olympic experience started to get in. So at that point, you had global design, and then you still had the regional design pockets. And so that was Amsterdam, or actually Hilversum, which is a small little city right outside of Amsterdam, Hong Kong, and then Portland in the US. But we had like satellite offices in New York, and we had a great design hub in Tokyo. And so those were all places where I could, sit myself for a week or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And work out of, which was sort of the beauty of working for a company like Nike.
Do you remember the first win that you had, like the first project that you did at Nike, where it was like, yeah, I'm doing this. I'm here. This is happening. I'm walking into stores in Tokyo. I'm picking up my gowns in different colors, like that. You know,
what?
You know,
that's a great question. I think one of the things I learned by, sort of, so the other thing that was happening is when I became design director of global for men's, that's when my relationship was really about building teams as well as what I was doing. So there's kind of a pivot point between when it was about me trying to get to that level. And then once I was at that level, it's not just about me, it's about building teams and directing people. I would say the first win was, that early stuff that I was designing. I created some capsules that just made a buttload of money. And so, that was a win because then the business respected what I was doing and they had more confidence each season when I would bring things to the table because, hey, this guy has, the fleece collection that he created, was $100 million platform across all of the regions, but also there's a lot of competition, there's a bunch of A-type personalities that are all kind of, and so the key is that you're actually recognizing the wins that everybody has, because that's what motivates you to do the crazy things that designers have to do, which is go through that creative process where you hit it out of the park, but then all of a sudden it doesn't matter because you're now responsible for the next season and the next design. So you don't rest on your wins for very long because there's so much work ahead of you to do. And one of the things that I did not mention was that even though I talked about that early part of Nike, it was I had a business merchant who was working with me tell me this. She goes, you don't understand Nike yet because you just got here, but basically anything you want, if you can prove there's a reason why you want it to help you, you'll probably get it. So if that was a trip or a tool or learning or what have you. So, that's a very different cadence than I think most people think about when they go into a company. And so really what that meant is that my ability to learn while I was at Nike was open to whatever direction that I wanted to go. And that's kind of where I made the decision to be more performance-based, because all of a sudden, yes, design is great, but actually adding performance and to quantify it being better tied to the design and the aesthetic, like those things and those marriage was really exciting. So it wasn't just about designing product. It was about learning about what is the innovation and the technology and the performance attribute that I want to empower, and how do I use that innovation and that engine plus a design aesthetic plus athlete insights coming together to create a really dynamic product. And when you had that story nailed down, yes, you still had lots of people's opinions. Everything that I've done at Nike for about 80% of my time at Nike has always been at the visibility where everybody, including at the time the CEO, Mark Parker, would see the work that was being done. And it's about understanding that everybody, if you ask somebody for an opinion, they're going to give you their opinion. But it's also about having the confidence to steer those conversations, because I think you've all heard sort of the joke that a camel is a horse designed by committee, and so the worst thing you can do as a designer is to just, not allow or to stray from your vision. Not to say that you're not incorporating the feedback from the people. So it's this balance of embedding that feedback that you're getting, maintaining the vision that you had, and bringing that through the process. And, many people that you would speak to at Nike will tell you that the hardest process at Nike is our internal process. Once we're at market, once it's out on the consumer, that's the easy part. The hardest part is actually moving that through this very complex matrix at Nike. But that complex matrix at Nike actually created phenomenal growth. So as complicated as it was, it kind of worked. I mean, it did work. It worked really well.
So this lands perfectly, Scott. What I was going to ask before actually was about how did you create that growth in Nike? I guess when you're designing to like a collection for Nike, there's sort of a standard that you need to meet, but also like how do you push through that and grow in a different direction? But I think that's when you started to say that I started to reach more into innovation rather than just products, and like how those things come together, which I thought was really interesting. But yeah, back to my point. So we're getting to stage 3 now, behind the curtain at Nike. You just mentioned about the process, and you said that it was like a matrix and something very crazy. We're both really interested in what is that process at Nike, from going from a product to getting that out there into the world to showing that innovation that you just spoke about.
Even from like getting the brief on your desk first morning.
Yeah. Well, it's a great question, and that is actually it is a. And I'm going to try to maybe jump to the Olympics, because that really shows probably one of the most complex processes. And so, in 2008, I became the creative director for Olympics. So pretty quickly, and that was for the Beijing Olympics, which was China. And at that point in 2008, China was one of the largest growing sectors. I mean, the business that was happening out of China was just phenomenal. And so that Olympics was seen as like, we got to get it right, because this is so much fundamental of the growth that will happen at Nike. Yes, the US was substantial, the Europe was substantial, but China was sort of this new emerging market, and they were just, the Chinese consumer was discovering, there's a mentality shift, because exercise to sweat was kind of a taboo for a lot of the Chinese consumers up until they started to understand sport and health and what have you. And that process actually starts. I mean, we were sort of framing out the 2008 direction in 2006. And part of that reason is that there are so many of these sort of filters that come in. And so part of the process was sort of creating a vision around the aesthetic and where we wanted to go. But it was also below that were the innovation platforms that were being worked on by the innovation teams for that. And so 2008 was unique because we had been challenged by our CEO, who at that time was Mark Parker, to really think about sustainability. And this was kind of the first where sustainability was, that's the creative direction for Olympics. But so that the innovation part was sustainability. And so the Beijing Olympics was the first time that we had recycled polyester. And if you don't know what recycled polyester is, it actually comes from sort of they take all the waste, like in the water bottles, and they melt it down to the polymer level, and then they strewn out it as polyester. So it's called recycled polyester. So it really takes our garbage, and it was really the first time at any sort of level that we did this with recycled polyester, because we didn't know if recycled polyester would still have the performance benefits when we would create all the sort of materials for track and field and basketball, et cetera. So the reason I love the creative direction of Beijing is because we went really deep into sort of the cultural language of the country. So we really, and what was so great about that exercise was I relied on teams that sat in the region. So I had a design director that sat in Hong Kong who was Chinese, that really understood what it meant to be the Chinese consumer. And at that time, this whole superhero aesthetic was kind of being driven. So the whole creative direction was superhero. But his point was, you know what? The Chinese don't really know superhero. Like we're not, but they do know the terracotta soldier, which is a old historical story about these sort of terracotta soldiers that protected the cities. And there was, you can actually go visit them. So kind of, we had this sort of superhero for the rest of the world, but we brought it up as terracotta soldiers for China. And what we did was that we were super respectful of the Chinese heritage. And that's where a lot of people go awry, is that they don't take the cultural implications serious enough. And I'm sure you've seen lots of stories where something is done design-wise that offends, a community or what have you. What was, and like, for instance, taking the yellow stars out of the flag of China would never be done. It is always those stars inside the flag together. So if the graphic designers wanted to take those stars out and put it it's like, no, that's not done. The other absolute was there is a China red, and it is that red. I mean, there's some variance in there, but there is a China red of the flag that is the China sport, whatever. And you just don't deviate from that. Other countries, we were able to mix that, but China was very, very good. And so what might seem like, oh, that's so limiting, actually created, I think, one of the best creative directions around a country, because those guardrails really make for a really tight execution. Yeah. And within those guardrails, wonderful creativity can come out. And so, so we had that, and I can't tell you the number of gates and dates that were done where the brief of the category, the design direction of Olympics, the innovation platforms, sort of, and it's just sort of this growing crescendo of meetings where, at the very beginning it's being worked out, but it gets better and better and better until you go to market. And that's because of that, what I was talking about earlier. We've got all of the stakeholders in the business. We had a China GM, we had an Olympics GM, we had I was the creative director, we had a VP of design, we had CEOs, we had the business leads, we had the VPs of each of the categories. So you have a very strongly opinionated group that are all kind of bringing consensus to this mission. So if it sounds crazy, it's good, because it is. And that was actually, at that point, though, I understood how to navigate that matrix. 4 or 5 years earlier, when I just got it at Nike, it was overwhelming. It was just like, wow, there's all these people and players and what have you. By the time the Olympics for Beijing came, I kind of understood. Didn't tell me it wasn't crazy, and there weren't, of course there were setbacks and people's opinions or what have you, but at the end, we delivered on that creative direction. It created great revenue for the company, and we launched this first sort of sustainable chapter through basketball, track and field, rowing, canoe kayak, various sports. The other big thing that we had at Beijing Olympics, and my counterpart in footwear was a guy named Sean McDowell. He did every single footwear for every single sport. So whether it was equestrian or sports we weren't into, because we had the entire Chinese federation. So we had every single China federation going into the Olympics. That's the other sort of thing is and this kind of goes back to Olympics, is the federation, the federations are things that are deals with companies. So for Beijing, we had something like 21 track and field federations. Adidas probably had the other 10. We had, I think, 12 basketball federations. Adidas had some. And so these are contracts with these federations. And in apparel, you have to have the sign off of the federation, like, yes, we like this. But in footwear, the relationship and the contract is with the athlete. So in apparel, we had a whole other level of sign off. And that was actually with the actual federation. Yes, this is the vision that Nike had. But if the federation said, we don't want it, we don't like it, we would have to go back to ground zero. So all these meetings that I'm talking about that were internal, apparel at the same time is meeting with the federations to bring them on board so that they would sort of sign off. And, so I'm out there doing sort of this world trip where we would go into all these different countries, China, Germany, Ukraine, Russia, signing off with their federation officials. And of course, sometimes they would be here for some big track and field event. So we're using sort of all of these global dates and gates on top of all of the global dates and gates at Nike to kind of create sort of this sort of vision. Now, I sound like I'm a really detailed, map it out guy. I'm not. I relied on the people who really are experts in that to tell me where to show up, when to show up, or what I need to do to show up at that. I mean, I sort of jest, but there's a whole team of, business people that are kind of mapping out the dates and gates towards marketing or what have you. And, it's all involved in sort of weekly, monthly meetings. And again, that sort of chaos is something that now that I've stepped away from Nike, I still really love. It's because I can handle it very well, and I can kind of bring consensus and vision and focus on a process that's very chaotic, messy, and disruptive.
Nice. Obviously through these experiences, you're leading a lot. Do you know what I'm saying, Scott? So like, you've spoken really highly of Elliot Hill,
Yes.
calling him one of quote unquote, one of the most outstanding C-suite executives that you've worked with. So, Elliot, and alongside Elliot, who were these leaders that helped you lead the way you lead, Scott?
Well, there's a couple. Mark Parker was one that was great. And the reason I mentioned Mark was that he actually came up through design. So he was a designer by trade and, designed shoes when he first got to Nike. And Mark, as a CEO, always leaned into design, where at the certain dates and gates, there was always opportunities to bring Mark in. And what was great about Mark was, yes, he obviously, he created this sort of category construct. It's where we all aligned. And so in 2008, everything that I just talked about, the category or the organization also was going through one of the most major shifts of how they did this business, which was called the category construct. And that was that everybody kind of aligned against the category. So there was a basketball category, and everything, sports marketing, merchandising, brand marketing, all sat in that. So it was like an old separate business unit. So that was for basketball, track and field, and all the other sports. So not only did the Olympics happen, but it was actually sort of the focal point for the most major shift the organization had ever had. And it also was the 10-year growth was phenomenal. And so Mark was in charge of all of that. So yes, he was leading the stewardship of this great vision, but he also could get into a meeting and he could get down into the very finite detail of design. Now, sometimes people that were in those meetings didn't like it, how finite Mark would get. I loved it because I could speak that language to him. And he was the one that challenged design to think about sustainability different. And he was the one that said it's going to be design that actually takes Nike into what is now called Move to Zero, which is zero carbon, zero waste. It's been called a couple of different things. It was called It's Considered, but it's all under that sustainability umbrella. And that challenge by him to me, I kind of took as my roadmap for the rest of my career at Nike. And I always used that as kind of my, everything that I created was through the lens of sustainability. So Mark was definitely one of those. Elliot was not in design. He was actually part of the sales organization. But Elliot was just one of those individuals. And, I've worked with a lot of C-suite individuals. And the reason Elliot stands out is because I don't think he, although he has an enormous responsibility as the CEO and the various roles he has had, he's never lost sight of the importance of all of the different disciplines and all of the different people that make up Nike and make up the culture of Nike. Now, you when you're in a brand, it gets very culture centric. When you step outside of that brand, you are a little less culture centric because you don't need that impetus to kind of vision what you want to do. But when you're inside a brand, you become very brand-opic as far as what have you. But Elliot was just a very, pragmatic, always interested in you, sort of individual. In particular, the one moment that I remember was that I was flying to Los Angeles and he happened to sit right next to me, which was fantastic. I thought it would be sort of, the sort of hello, how are you? And then he would, get back into sort of his lap. It wasn't. It was 2.5 hours of his kids. What are you doing?
Oh, nice.
What he was doing, and his kids were going to school and art and galleries, and what are you doing? And oh yeah, you're going down to work with Getty to look at the Tokyo Olympics, and I mean it was just this fantastic conversation. And so I think that really struck me as sort of the type of individual that Elliot was. And so unfortunately, I'm not working with Elliot now, but I know from the people who are at Nike, his stepping back into the organization has kind of brought back a lot of sort of the things that people really admired about Nike: innovation, design, athlete, and really creating, the coolest shit out there. And so, they had a 5-year spot where that wasn't the vision. And they suffered from it, and the organization is now, through his stewardship, getting sort of back into sort of that groove. And I love that because, I'm so passionate about innovation and sustainability, and that sort of draws me to the things that I do now as well. And so it's nice to see that sort of happening. There's been other leaders. The person who brought me into design into Olympics was a gentleman named Todd Van Horn. And he was one of those leaders that always was empowering the teams that he was creating. And I would say the great thing about that was, the learning from that was, I, at that point, was leading teams as well. So it was really it was not what I was doing. It was like, what am I doing in order to supercharge the team that I'm leading? What am I doing in order to make the team that reports to me be the best that they can be? And so a lot of that is to, move the roadblocks that they have, but also to empower them to do what they needed to do. And that has been a very sort of successful mantra for me. I'm sure you've heard about people managing up and people managing down. I managed down much more than I managed up. Maybe I shouldn't have, but I was always super invested in my team. And I created a team in innovation that was very staggered. So we had design ones, design twos, seniors, and design directors. And really sort of proud of kind of the, bringing in a designer right out of school and watching them excel versus a designer who's been there for 15 years and kind of does amazing things. There are also designers who are sort of individual contributors. They're the ones you just want to put into a corner and just let them do their magic. And then there's other designers who are really good at, working with consensus in teams and stuff like that. So to recognize sort of the strengths of individuals is super important because, design is a very, we would do sort of lots of sort of assessments of design. And, when you have a design team, the way that they interact is very different. We sometimes, I think all designers kind of think and react and have the same emotions. It's the very opposite. They're as diverse as sort of any other sort of group of people.
Just to wrap up this section of leadership, you yourself being a great leader and having these other leaders to learn from, you've mentioned then you've learned from mistakes and you've grown in certain ways. What are the sort of top traits to you that makes the ideal leader?
Oh, great question. Well, I would say communication is kind of key because there's so many opportunities for communications to kind of go awry, but it is not in a hovering manner. Like my design teams, I laid out their expectations and they mostly always delivered. And if there wasn't, there was other conversation in that. But I don't need to micromanage a senior designer who's been designing for 20 years every day or every if they're not there, if they want to come in at 7 a.m. and leave at 3 p.m., I'm fine with that. I'm not one who needs to micromanage. And so I give them the power to do it themselves, knowing that, there's checkpoints. And then if there's an issue, that becomes sort of worked at. But it's communication and kind of allowing them, they're all grown ass adults. They don't need me to micromanage them, but they have a very clear expectation of what I expect from them when they do deliver. And mostly 90% of the time that works for everybody. There's 10% that sometimes you have to manage more deeply. The other thing is collaboration. So part of my favorite part was sort of my weekly design meetings, which had sort of the color organization, the design organization, the graphic organization. So these were all people that don't report to me, but were part of the process. But to watch this sort of collective group brainstorm and kind of talk about what they thought, I used to love that because, listening to all of these people give their viewpoints. Yes, I had a vision that we were going for, but it was being built by this collective talent of people. And I never took my eyes off that all of these, for the Tokyo Olympics, I had this color team that was just phenomenal because we had a very complicated material that took 3 colors. And so they were doing all of these strike-offs in these sort of 2 and 3 color ways. And for each country, they had 10 or 12. And the nuance that they were bringing just to color, but then they would bring that to the meeting was amazing. And that's something nobody sees once that uniform gets out onto the world to see. But the work that went to making sure that we had the right vibration of Team USA with the right red and the right blue, and these colors that were maybe sometimes a little more shy with sort of how they spoke, giving them the environment where even the most shy of designers would participate and tell us their opinions. For me as a leader was fantastic. It also was fantastic, and I'm going to get on with sort of the teams that I built were the most diverse teams you can imagine. And so and they were diverse because the aperture that I threw out to gather talent was wide. It had nothing to do with their abilities because their abilities were phenomenal. But they came from Japan. They came from Europe. They came from Germany. They were industrial designers. They were fashion designers. They came from all sorts of schools. They came from Central St. Martin's, Parsons in New York, Otis in Los Angeles, all of these Marist in New York. And so that aperture was I was opening it up as wide as possible to bring in this sort of diverse talent pool, ages, culture, ethnicities, all of that was part of what I was looking for. So, I don't want to get too political, but, DEI has become this weaponization, and it just makes me sick because I built diverse teams and the teams became so successful because of the diversity. And so that's kind of something that I still am front and center. My success was because I brought in different. I don't want people who all think like me. How boring would that be? I want people who don't think like me, and kind of create this tension within design that then brings the results that are wow, we had that's not what we were expecting. That to me is what a great design leader does.
Yeah. A room filled with misfits.
Yeah, exactly.
I think beautiful. There's a guy called Brian Collins, who's really kind of renownedly known in the branding kind of packaging space. And he says that he speaks very highly of that, creating these rooms filled with misfits, beautiful people who wear different clothes and eat different food and have different backgrounds to bring different perspectives to the table and the freshness to the work and the originality essentially to the work, right? To keep things pushing. Throughout your times being on the floor and that, did you ever bump into Phil Knight?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah, for real. What was he like? I've just listened to the book again. I've just checked Shoe Dog again.
So actually, not like Mark Parker, but every Olympics, we would present to the board of directors. And so that would be sort of a Phil Knight sort of meeting.
Wait. Paint that picture for me, Scott. Paint that picture. What does that look like? Before you walk into that room and Phil Knight sat there chilling, waiting for you to present work to him, what does that room look like and what's that setting like?
Well, so, there were a few Phil Knight meetings, but the most consistent were the board of directors. Obviously, the level of the level that Olympics played for Nike as a strategic tool was huge. So every Olympics, the board would just like to see, and it's just at the end of the process. But we had basically built out a room. There'd probably be, there are some amazing brand videos that were, Steven Spielberg worth videos that were all done internally, never to be seen by the public. I mean, they're all part of the tools that we used to present. It was a very high level tap on sort of the vision and where we were going. Nothing too deep, nothing too just enough to sort of give them the vision of what they were going to see. Not a few questions, usually not a lot of questions. Sometimes you would look at the board and, maybe 75% of them are truly engaged and 25% of them are not. But I think it was and they always went well because by that point it had been vetted through every sort of senior C-suite manager. But the times where you would see Phil more often is he almost always walked into the cafeteria to get his own lunch. And so you would see Phil standing in line, he did not expect to cut a line. He would stand in line, and the lines weren't that long. He would stand in line, and he would stand in line to pay for his lunch, and then he'd go off. And so a lot of people have experiences with Phil Knight standing in line with him because he was that sort of accessible leader. My other Phil Knight memory was very early. And Phil Knight, if you've heard him speak, Phil has a very iconic voice. I mean, I don't know if it's because we've heard his voice so often, but whenever I hear his voice, it just kind of resonates. He has a very powerful, distinctive voice. And he's done a lot of videos where he speaks. But after 9/11, we were all completely, like no one quite knew what to do. And he brought the entire campus together and they created something called Run Across America, where they kind of took what Nike does, which is running, and they connected it to so that there was like this physical thing happening where we were going to take this baton and run from Beaverton across the country to New York and as close to the 9/11 as we could, as sort of a charity event to help those in need and what have you. It was very symbolic, but at that point, that's exactly what everybody needed because there was such chaos and craziness and, people didn't know how to react. And he came together and he brought all of the employees together with sort of, this is what we're going to do as our response. And although, it didn't bring back a life, it didn't build a building, but it gave the people at Nike the sense of community. And, I don't share this very often, but this was 6 months before I met my now husband. And his offices were in the towers. And he was able to evacuate because when the first tower was hit, it was right across from his conference room. And so he was taken out immediately. So kind of his life was saved. And I didn't realize how connected I would be to 9/11 at that point. But knowing that was the response of the organization, and then 6 months later realizing that my husband had a very deep personal connection to that as well was something that was very meaningful. So Phil Knight was kind of always that omnipresent force that was the steward of the organization. So, it's not like I, sat down and had lunch with him, but if you went up to talk to him, he was a very accessible leader and pretty phenomenal. I had said to myself it was going to be a 5-year stint when I moved up. I was talking about 5 years back, so then I'll go on to something else. But, Portland in that time grew a lot. And so the Portland that I moved to is no longer the Portland, There's so many cool areas of Portland and design, and there's other, Adidas has an office here, Columbia has an office here, Lululemon has an office here. There's a lot of performance offices in Portland.
Why is that?
A couple of reasons. One is because Nike brought such talent to Portland, it was an easy place to maybe poach talent as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so because the Portland just kind of became sort of this performance sort of center, with sort of all of these offices here. And so, it's kind of cool. And so you wouldn't expect it from Portland, but it's kind of its specialty. We have Intel. So it's a very big little city.
After that 21 years, Scott, you've obviously made the decision to leave Nike. What prompted that? And that must have been a tough decision.
It was, I'm not going to speak names or anything, but Nike went through 5 years of a CEO who came from the board, which I think everybody in any sort of postmortem, and you can Google it online, was a disaster for the organization. He changed away from innovation being really sort of the strong pivot of what the DNA was. It was sort of this data-driven sort of idea, thought the organization was too complex, and started to offload hundreds and hundreds of senior designers, design directors, vice presidents, for this data-driven model, which was disastrous for the organization. The Nike stock still is not today where it was when I left Nike. So this is almost 5 years later. And so that was part of the reason why I left Nike. And it was also during a really, I'm almost numb to it, but it was, during the pandemic. We were still sheltering at home. The vaccine was just coming onto the marketplace. It was a dark time for a lot of us, and at that point I was in Los Angeles more because at least you could get outside and it was a little more sunny and what have you. But what was amazing was the connectivity that was created because of the pandemic became the creativity that opened up a lot more individuals that you may never have been introduced to. And so, Space 2 was one of those individuals, JP, who is out of the UK, where we started to talk about sort of what it could be. And sort of the quick way to think about Space 2 is it's like Tinder for creatives, where it's sort of this sort of ecosystem where a platform of creators and designers and musicians and writers can come together and they can create. But it's the first that uses sort of blockchain to sort of secure IP integrity. So, what it does is, and what's great is this sort of co-create vision of the world is expanding rapidly. We're not co-creating now, but we are creating content. And so the ability to allow designers to be in this sort of area. And, you had lots of designers from a lot of different companies now that are freelance and doing things on their own. So it really became that sort of platform that sort of is this sort of limitless creative possibilities with instant connections. So it sort of is this platform. It's a very different skill set that I'm used to. I'm coming from sort of the design, but now it's really sort of in sort of the actual the actual vision of how this comes together, how it works, what platforms it marries into. We've been lucky where, we've been working with sort of a lot of angel funding and investors. And then we've actually brought some great inroads with UK Innovate, which is a sort of an innovation seeding pipeline within the United Kingdom government, which is great because their vision is to how can we seed these different businesses that will eventually bring sort of work and revenue to our countries. And so we're at that soft launch phase right now. And so once that link comes live, I'll send it to both of you, and you can see what it's about. But did I know 3.5 years ago that it would be 3.5 years of this slogging through angel funding and what have you? No. But I've got the tenacity of the people who are involved, who are kind of giving their time, has been fantastic. And it allows me to kind of bring in a very different sort of creative energy from sort of the Nike energy. And that being said, I'm actually still sort of doing some consulting with sport companies because, again, if you take sort of my sweet spot, which is sort of innovation, sustainability, and design, that is still an area where, unfortunately, in the past 2 or 3 years, post-COVID, the vision of a lot of those companies have kind of backpedaled a little bit. And, my pitch around sustainability is, hey, we have one Earth. And we all are using that one Earth, and so, there are companies out there that, are making a lot of money that just aren't thinking about the negative footprint that they are leaving. I don't have kids, but I still have sort of the moral aptitude to think about, I don't want to leave all this to my friends' kids. I want to see a world that doesn't have, New York just this past weekend had all this major flooding and these storms that, that has become more common, and we've been so desensitized to it because we're on to the next story, what have you. But it's not, what happens the next time or in 10 years when New York has that storm and the water doesn't go away? The West Side Freeway is just now underwater for, 6 months of the year. It's crazy. And I don't want to go down that road, but sustainability and kind of creating a zero carbon, zero waste future is something that I'm still super passionate about and kind of drives sort of the work that I do today.
Oh, I love it. That's awesome. You know what I mean, Scott? It's so inspiring. You're someone who really does get it, and I love how much you understand creativity, but not just understanding creativity, what it takes to get the best creativity out of a team of people as well, from the leaders that you've obviously been inspired by through your journey. And I think as well, Scott, like going back to your beginnings, you just fucking chuck yourself in the middle of the water and learn how to swim. And I think there's something I think that's something to be said about the younger creators listening to this. I believe that pressure's a privilege later in your career, and maybe even earlier in your career as whatnot. But like being in a place where you actually don't really understand what's going on, you're just doing stuff and you're saying yes to things and trying to brush shoulders with Andy Warhol in your case, you know what I'm saying? Whatever it is, and taking your big bite. So what would your advice be to younger creatives trying to make it into whatever discipline they're trying to get themselves into?
Well, I think you have to love what you do. And, you love what you do because I've seen your tenacity and your passion. And that is actually the roadmap to how you do it. And yes, you may, hit a number of, or you're not hitting walls, but maybe you're not getting the traction that you think you should. But one of those days, one of those doors is going to open and it's going to push right through. But the key is you're doing it because you love what you do. You love the creative process. You love design. You love meeting new people, what have you. Like I can't imagine having a job that I don't love, getting up, going through what I have to go through to do what I do. I love it. Like as crazy as it is, it's because I'm passionate. And I get to sit back, and when I do have a moment to reflect, I'm like, God, my team, or I walk into a Nike town and I see the work displayed there or what have you. I give myself maybe 60 seconds to like reflect on, that's really cool. And I put it away and I'm on to the next thing.
That's really interesting, keeping yourself in check a bit. I can't imagine, like I said, like for me and Michael, it's like seeing a logo in the world or seeing a bit of pack or whatever it is. You know what I mean? It's if we do get to design some merch, some cool merch, we might see it live on someone. But walking into a Nike store and seeing some of your stuff on rails and then people picking it off and like wearing it themselves, I think that must be a crazy thing. Even just walking down the street and seeing someone wear it must be crazy. You know?
Well, I have to tell you a funny story. What I never realized is that there's a whole YouTube community that will take the medal stand product from Nike, and I've been in charge of the medal stand product since 2008, and they'll do a critique of it. So they'll take 30 minutes and they'll go through the design and the logo placements and the color, and they'll bring in their opinions and the this and the that. And I'm watching it, and it's so amusing to me. It's like, I want to respond like, I know, it's just kind of fun watching them, there's a team of, 25 people from materials and color and what have you that created this, but this is content for them to have their little YouTube channel, and they talk about what they like, what they don't like, and what we should have thought of, and maybe the next time. And I mean, I love it, but it's actually quite amusing to me because we all are kind of a critic, right? In today's day and age of media. But it's kind of, and also, there's been failures. I mean, I remember for Tokyo Olympics, we did a pretty radical Kenya design. They had not a GoFundMe, but where you have those, where you sign up for petition. They had like a national petition to ask Nike to redesign it for them because they were so upset at how it looked. And so, I got these articles coming from like the Kenyans are really mad at Nike. And then there are reviewers like, where did they get this designer who did this? Did they just step out of the boat? Like they've never designed anything in their life. Like just this crazy negativity. And, a lot of times design, when you first see it, you're like, oh, what is that? And then all of a sudden, 6 months, a year later, it's like, oh, you know what? There's something here. So, I'm giving a lot of positives, but there's been a lot of negative out, but it's the world we live in. I don't take it personally, and I know at that moment is where we wanted to land and we landed. So it's all fun. But to young design, and also reach out. You know what? LinkedIn is a great sort of platform that links people that may not have worked before, blogs, what have you. You never know what, you may not get a response, but sometimes you will get a response, and that's all is important as well.
Yeah, shooting shots. I love it. Is there a Nike principle at the top of your head that you could leave us all with to keep in mind when we're creating, that you keep top of your mind?
We had 10 maxims, which were sort of our guiding principles. The one that I kind of like is there is no finish line, because that is sort of the mantra that you are like, if you created something that's the fastest ever in history, that's not the finish line, because the next Olympics, you're going to create something that's even faster than what you've created. And so I think I live by that pretty much, where there's never a finish line. Like, even if I'm finished with something, I'm on to the next. What did I learn? What can I do better? What new technology now is filtered in that allows me to do something differently before? And so I love that sort of there is no finish line. That kind of like, there's no time for me to pat my shoulder. I'm moving forward, next best thing.
Let's go. Let's go.
That's amazing, Scott.
It's so good, honestly. I think, that's a lovely place to end it, Scott. Do you know what I mean? One final question. What are you making sure that you make time for? Do you do any personal projects? I can imagine your wardrobe is filled with outtakes from collections no one's ever seen.
Interesting enough, I have a huge wardrobe, but I give and donate about 20% of it each year, which is just older stuff. Because I have so much, and I have so many blessings that I know there are a lot of people. And actually, used clothes stores are all part of that circular economy. Yeah. And so, I love donating a lot. So you would think I would have thousands of pairs of shoes. I would if I didn't donate it, but I donate it. And I end up wearing probably the same sort of core items, whatever. I do have a massive wardrobe. Don't need
if you wanted say you wanted a pair of like a collaboration, I don't know, a hyped pair of trainers, say at Nike, would you have a connect there to just get them? Like one of the Cactus Jacks from Travis Scott or something, like you'd be able to just get them?
Even when I was sitting at Nike, I couldn't get some of those. I would have to go to StockX to get them.
I've been running up on Phil Knight. I'd be like, Phil, sort me out. Do you know what I mean? Amazing, Scott. Thank you so much. I'm sure, like, you've lit me up inside. Like, I love Nike, and Nike. For some reason, it's like as a kid, Nike. You say Nike, and I feel I should be saying Nike, but in the UK, obviously, everyone says Nike in it. But growing up as a kid, you can't in the UK, you kind of went one way or the other, Michael. In it, like you either kind of navigated towards Nike or navigated towards Adidas, and Nike was just always the cool thing. From where I was from, so that's all I ever wore. It was TNs, it was 95s, it was tracky pants, tracky tops, and I still wear it today. Like I've sent you that video that I created from that personal project I did for him, of my trainer collection and whatnot. But this is a kind of a bit of a mad moment to hear it from your take, Scott. It's a bit crazy.
Well, actually, it's kind of interesting because Adidas had such penetration in there. So it's interesting that you're not Adidas.
Yeah. Never. It was like, I don't know why my group of friends, or you know what it is at school, everyone's like everyone in it. Do you know what I mean? So everyone just falls into the same bracket. So we all wore Nike, so that's what we wore. It was just, I just never found myself really wearing much Adidas, which is mad.
I think Nike sat more with like youth culture in the UK, a lot more people that are into like UK grime, UK hip hop, and like even still today, it's like Nike tracksuits, all blacked out, like you said, Kristian, the TNs, the 95s. Yes, it's a really huge part of UK culture.
It is. I love it. Right. Well, listen, Scott, thank you so much. I can't thank you enough for your energy, and we'll keep up to date with Space 2 and beyond Space 2. And I hope that we can. You know what? I hope I can meet you in Portland, mate. I'm trying to work out how to get there and sort a trip out for the new year. So I'll hopefully see you live in the flesh at some point, Scott.
Let me know. Michael, it's great introducing you. It was great talking. Love your excitement, and feel free to reach out anytime.
Yeah, Scott. I mean, like I said, Michael's sat in China right now, so I could see his face lighting up when you're talking about that Beijing Olympics project and stuff. So sick.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I've just been to Hong Kong as well for the first time, like literally a few days ago. So just hearing about like your journey there and spending time there, and yeah, like you said, Beijing Olympics, and yeah, just being here right now it's really cool to hear to have this conversation.
Well, I mean, you've got some of the most incredible cities just very close to you. So while you're over there, make sure you enjoy them.
I'm getting about, don't you worry, Scott.
He's getting about. Listen, thank you everybody for listening. Please like, share, subscribe, and catch you on the next one.